Yeah, it's great to meet you. I love what you're doing. And before we get into that, I want to know, 4 years ago with this pandemic, kind of rearranged everything. And I know LA was hit really hard with all the restrictions. So I'm curious, how did you survive that time period? And how did it subsequently change the way that you do things now?
I, you know, Obviously we went, fully remote, which for me, I have to say, like, kind of luckily, like I wasn't that badly impacted by the pandemic and like my work wasn't. So that was kind of the good thing. I used the kind of that time to like, you know, be a little more creative and things kind of slowed down. I could kind of focus on things that I probably had been putting off for a long time. So for me, it really was, I want to say nice, which it sounds insensitive, but do you know
Right.
what I mean? Like it was kind of like a nice time to, just kind of focus and get realigned with stuff that means the most, you know?
Everybody I talk to a lot of people, and no one ever comes out and says, "Oh my God, it was the worst time of my life." Now, there are
Yeah.
things that were part of it, but I think there was a lot of silver linings that went into it. People took advantage of things. I mean, how can you not? I
Yeah.
mean, we all know the woe and the sick that went into it, but how can you not look at like downtime or things slowing down as a moment to realize your existence and what you want?
Yeah. I think it probably came at an interesting time in like culture, in like a, very macro sense. It's like maybe we kind of needed that, reflection time.
That's brilliant. That is, I have not heard that, but that is totally true. Because there was a musician that was American living in Germany at the time, and he was explaining, and this was during the pandemic. He said America is like a car that's like hanging on the cliff, just teetering. Just like one little wind, one little rock that moves away from going over. And we needed to find a way to say what's going on because America was the only place that had the strife that we got from dealing with Floyd and coming to grips with things that we were doing wrong. Like we were the only country when there was a blazing inferno to throw a can of hairspray in it just to
Yeah.
see how much it can explode more. So there
Yeah.
was a lot of things. It is interesting, and I think culturally we needed to be reset.
Yeah.
So you're a best-selling author, you're a social media expert, but if we were to break this down to brass tacks, and I put you in front of a third grade class at career day, and one of the kids said, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
I would say I tell stories, right? And then just the format of those stories is different. So I very, literally like tell stories writing books. Do you know what I mean? And like you said, I've had three books, so I, write books, and that's kind of like my biggest passion is kind of being a storyteller in that sense of just telling actual, stories um, that have, kind of like meanings and impact and, kind of built into the fiction, this, what the stories are. And then I tell stories for other people. So I work with different businesses and brands and companies and um, create content for them. I don't know if we're still speaking to third graders, but create content
They'll
for
get it.
them and help them tell their stories as well. So, branding and creating content for that, like doing videos and photography, setting up photo shoots, like all that kind of stuff, really telling their brand story, it kind of in a more long form, kind of more regular way.
So if you were in that seat as a third grader, what was your dream growing up? What did you want to be?
I remember we did this in like in third grade, actually. I remember exactly what it was. And it was like draw a picture of like your dream job. And I think that Mission Impossible had just come out. I'm dating myself, like the first one. And I drew myself with like undercover in this like grand ballroom with me and my agents, like all like kind of like staking out, and because I wanted to be like a secret agent.
Right on.
So I had a big imagination, obviously, even then. So yeah, but I've been writing since I was a kid. Like my parents would give me those like black and white like composition books,
Yeah.
and they were like my, I would fill them up with like my novels, just fill them up with stories, and so I've been writing for forever.
What was the book growing up that really left an impact on you? One that you absolutely loved?
Well, I think, I mean, when I was like very young, like in that like elementary school time, like the Goosebumps series was
Yep.
like really easy to read, and like there's so many, so you kind of wanted to read as many as you could to get to the next one, which was so cool, I think, for young people to be, encouraged to, to read. I don't know if we have, if that's still, as big of a thing now. But I want to, kind of the one that like had the most impact on me as like a young adult was probably The Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah.
And have, I'm a sucker for like coming of age stories. And I don't think that that's like limited to teenagehood. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Like, I think you can come of age at any time of your life. So a lot of the stories that I write about are those types of things, like figuring out life and like, your place in it.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Who is a hero? Who's been an inspiration for you in your life?
I think they've probably changed a bit, but I feel like I was always, this is going to sound kind of funny, but I was, because I think you get different heroes for like what you're like, you look for, or at least I do, I look for like synergy with my heroes. So it's not like, you know, um, like Brad Pitt could be like a hero because he's so cool,
Yeah.
But I remember when I was just graduating college and Gwyneth Paltrow, who obviously is like super famous for being an actor, was starting her company Goop at that time. And it was like in the time of like the blog. And I was a big blogger, kind of like a prolific blogger back in the early or the aughts. And so I was starting a new blog and she was starting her blog and I saw it kind of like I felt in obviously she's like 10 light years ahead of more successful than me, but I felt kind of like a parallel like of creating in parallel. And so I've looked to kind of her business model and how she was able to like pivot in her career or like have a new career and like kind of create something new. And so that's always been really cool to me to like you're never too old to create something new. Obviously we were kind of doing some a similar kind of like industry, and so I've really looked up to her in a lot of ways.
So you may have already answered my next question, which is if you can meet one person alive on the planet that you find fascinating or interesting, who would that be? Who would you spend time with?
I mean, I'll take a lunch with Gwyneth Paltrow. That sounds
Yeah.
great. I mean, I think like Oprah would be cool. Just the
Yeah.
wisdom. Do you know what I mean? Like I would really want to be able to glean as much as I could from someone, whether,
Yeah. So what is it that motivates you every day to get up to do the work that you do? You're putting a lot out, you're creating these worlds. But you also have to hold back to evolve as a human being. What is that collective energy for you?
I think it's all about balance, because I have this social media, this digital agency, which takes a lot of time and supervision um and it's, I mean, with social media it's a world where you always have to be kind of like forecasting like what's going to be the next thing, and how do I advise my clients on like getting ahead of the curve, which I think is pretty, I mean, it's creative, but it's also very left-brained in its like the construction of how a business is run. And my writing and is like super right-brained, right? So I think living in a, it's my each day is finding a way to balance both of those things. So like in the morning I'll like make sure there's like no fires happening with like the social media side of the business. And then I'll kind of like get a lot of the work done like before noon. And then after that, I kind of, especially in the summertime, I like to go outside and just like read for an hour just to kind of like reset my brain and then allow myself to kind of be creative for the afternoon.
Yeah. So what's been the best advice that you've ever gotten?
In terms of like business stuff,
Probably so, like something that's stuck with you that's been a motivator for not only your career path, but just growth as a human.
yeah. Um, That's a good question. Whenever someone asks me this, I always think about this thing, which is not business related at all, but I think it can kind of be applied to, like, especially as an entrepreneur. And I remember I was like going through like a breakup and my friend said to me, like, it was very simple, but he just said, like, protect your heart. And I thought that was it's so profound in its simplicity, but it's like, I think kind of what it means is like be true to yourself. Do you know what I mean? So when you're trying to build a business or write whatever, write something, like, I think it's just all about like just being like protect what matters to you and go
Hmm.
after what that is. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? I think it's just kind of be as authentic as you can in this life, because I think the most success comes when you do what you like, you know?
I actually was talking to my stepdaughter about this a few years ago. She was just disappointed at certain things, and teenagers will get disillusioned with how life works, which we all do. But as
Me
adults, we've
too.
been around long enough, right? We just kind of we have more mileage on our odometer, so to speak.
Right.
But I remember saying the one thing that you have, and it's akin to what you're talking about, is your dream. No one can penetrate that. That's the place that you have, that you protect, that's you and yours, and just protect that. Keep that intact. And I think
Yeah.
it's just like you said. And I think sometimes it's like the little kid in us. We're protecting that child inside of us so that it can run free. And there's
Yeah.
just levels of us that we have to be the ones that protect ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Superman like isn't coming. So, you know what
No,
I mean?
no,
Like,
it's not happening. No. So, of all of the things that you've done in your life, what are you the proudest of?
I'm probably proudest of, well, that's actually, well, so I feel like whenever you, as a creative person, like put out something like a piece of work, I'm the proudest of like the last thing that I did.
Uh-huh.
Do you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
But so I'm writing something now, or I've written something now that I'm trying to get published or get out into the world. And I feel like I want to say like, that is my proudest thing. But it could just be because because I think, the latest thing I did, because I think when you, like, I could say that it was like the last book that I published, which like did really well. And so like from like an external point, like external like perspective, like people like reach out to me a lot and say, "Oh, I read this book and it was so interesting. It mattered to me in some way," and that's been really cool. Um, because I think at some point it doesn't feel like it's like my thing and it's like my book anymore. It's like, oh, this kind of belongs to other people. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? That has been a really interesting experience. Um, so yeah, it's kind of a hard thing to answer, but I am really proud of this latest thing that I wrote. It's a story about, like, I'm very interested in like interpersonal relationships, and like I'm interested in like the complexities of like modern day dating.
Hmm.
And so it's like a story. I actually tried to get it published as like a nonfiction book, and no one wanted to publish it. But I kind of made it into fiction, and it's getting some traction. And it's just so interesting that, like, how dating has changed, and like
Hmm.
the way that people view relationships have changed. And is that because of, um, I think that on some level, like social media and like the internet has played a part in that. Like,
Yeah.
are we becoming is there some kind of like degradation of like intimacy because we don't know how to like communicate in person anymore? Like, so it's kind of about dating dynamics. It's like a romantic comedy kind of story.
Cool. Very cool. So that kind of is like a natural lead in to me asking if you had a dream tonight, you ran into that 18-year-old version of you. You could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on all the experiences you've gathered in life, the wisdom you've gained. What advice would you give your young self?
I think at 18 I wanted to be, to some level, doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
I would love to get my books like turned into a movie or something. I think that at 18, I thought that would be much easier process than and it is. So I think I would probably just say, and I still feel like I have more to do, you know? So
Mhm.
I think that I would tell the 18-year-old version of myself just to like, don't be discouraged. I think I mean, it's kind of the same thing we talked about earlier, but like, just don't be discouraged with, you know, like the pitfalls that are going to come,
Yeah.
and just like, I think I've stayed pretty true to kind of, I'm pretty much the same person as who I was when I was 18. So I feel like it's just like ride it out, and yeah, just ride it out, keep going,
Yeah.
I guess,
Yeah. I get it. I totally get it. So at the end of the day, Kyle, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone around you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
That's really interesting because I think we rarely like look outside and be objective about ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, I think that I think it's easier to look at that from the professional side of things, where it's like, because you have quantifiable things that you can measure, right? Like, oh, you have a business and like like physical, like, products that you've like put out into the world. So I think people would probably say that I'm ambitious, and which I think is good. And you know, I think I'm always surprised when people like say like tell me how they think of me, because I'm like, who's that? Like,
Yeah.
who are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't feel like me. Um, because it seems, like inflated.
Yeah.
But I think probably, I hope people would say that I'm like funny and like a good friend. And like, actually, one of my friends said to me, he was telling his therapist just, whatever things. And she said, do you have like a person that you can talk to? And he said it was me. And that's kind of like the best,
Yeah.
when you feel like your friends can confide in you, and really have trust. I think that is kind of the best thing.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So if anyone wants to get your books, they want to hire you, learn more about what you're doing, reach out, any of the good business, where can they go?
You can go to KJL Media is my website for all things, if you want social media consultations, I do, consultations, and um, that's kind of all on kjlmedia.com. And then my books are available on Amazon, and you can go to my Instagram is probably the best spot, and it's Kyle J. Langan, at
Okay.
Kyle J.
Excellent. Kyle, this has been wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate your story and time.
Thank you so much. It was really nice.
Yeah. Thank you. Take care.